Welcome to the Understanding Boys podcast. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which this podcast is recorded, the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. We pay respects to leaders past, present and emerging. The Understanding Boys podcast is a series of conversations exploring what it is to be a good man these days. So if you had a story about being a good man and that you could tell a 14-year-old boy and he'd actually listen, what would that story be? And that's really what I'm asking our guests today. I'm Dr. Ray Swan, and we're a community of teachers and parents concerned with the education and growth of boys in the modern world. The series is brought to you by Brighton Grammar, an all-boys school in Melbourne. To learn more about the podcast, please visit understandingboys.com.au. Welcome to our conversation today where we speak with Trevor Hendy. Some listeners would remember Trevor as an athlete, a warrior, in some ways the quintessential Australian icon. Tall, powerfully built, he was a fearless and at times seemingly unbreakable competitor in the world of surf lifesaving, where he won both Australian and then on to 6 world Ironman titles. Trevor was known to stare at the ocean, with at times huge waves breaking twice overhead, and then just to charge in with the mantra, "These are my ideal conditions." Trevor is a member of the Australian Hall of Fame for sport and in the year 2000 was awarded a member of the Order of Australia for his services to the community and to the sport of surf lifesaving. But as we know, there are costs to the life of a warrior, and as he continued to develop, Trevor's perspective changed, and that's hopefully what we'll touch on today. Trevor is now highly sought after as a corporate, sporting and life coach. He's a mentor, author and speaker. He runs programs like Boot Camp for the Soul and shares many of his growth stories of change. He's also a dad, husband, mentor and community man. Trevor, it's great to talk to you today.
Ray, you too, mate. And we've got a bit of a connection, from the past and even your brother as well. And it's just really cool to connect, mate. We're about the same thing. So I'm looking forward to the chat.
Thanks, Trevor. One of the ways in which you're probably not aware, I've never told you this, that we did connect is when I was a kid, I used to sit on the couch in a house in outer suburban Melbourne, eating Nutri-Grain, watching you compete.
Well, and that would have been the Uncle Toby's days too. So,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, put a few.
Right. So there was the cereal war. It was Nutri-Grain versus Uncle Toby's.
Yeah, Ironman food. Love it.
Yeah. I actually just did an interview this morning, and the guy sitting next to me he said, "I'm really nervous because I've got to be honest. I used to watch you compete all the time, and wanted to go out and emulate you." And we relaxed when we got into it, but it's funny. I hear that all the time. It was such a big series back in those days, and it's so funny because that's part of me that shone through is that real Ironman and flying across the water and willing to take on the conditions and never giving up. And it's a big part of who I am. But so much of the vulnerability didn't shine through in that period of time. So I feel like I've become more of myself since then. But anyway, that's all good.
Yeah, well, that's what I'd like to talk to you a bit about today, because I think, as we explore a bit of that story, there are, so many different parts of who you are and what you bring. And, I was actually looking at your website last night and some of the things that you'd written and some of the comments that people have also made, around the who you are. And, we were very fortunate to hear you speak, a couple of years ago as well. But where I wanted to start today, Trevor, was just about the ocean. I imagine for you with, originally a Melbourne boy and heading up north, but a lot of your life's work has revolved around the ocean. And I guess my first question was, what is your connection to the ocean and what has it taught you?
Well, mate, it's an interesting question because it rounds off a lot of things, actually. The ocean, I feel like I'm part of it, and it's part of me. It's to a bit of a philosophical answer. I just fell in love with foiling recently, and foiling is hydrofoiling on a surfboard where there's a mast that goes down underneath the surfboard, and then there's this front wing and a back wing that when you take off on the wave, you put a tiny little bit of weight towards the back, and then you rise up onto the foil. So you're standing 3 feet above the water. And
I think I've seen that.
Foil,
wow.
Yeah, well, the foil's not actually riding on the surface. The foil's actually riding underneath the water. So it actually taps into the same vortexes and swells and power points that the dolphins do when you see them riding waves. It's down into that little flow underneath, which is where I love to body surf too, to dolphin down under waves. And so I've always been exploring the way the ocean moves and the flow of it. And it's always created this real feeling in me whenever I go back into the ocean that something in me comes alive.
Yeah.
You know, and I was really scared of it when I was a kid, when I was very, very young. But then I threw nippers at Surfers Paradise Surf Club and then going on to ultimately do ocean Ironman racing around the world. And, you know, so it gave me I used to go to nipper training in the afternoon while everyone else is training. My buddy and I used to go in the shore break and try and stand up on the nipper boards and make the drop going down the shore break, the sucky shore break wave, standing up. And if we made the drop, we're like, yeah, you know, and if we didn't, we'd have to body surf in, pick up the board, go back out and try it again.
There we go, yeah.
I just remember I never wanted to train or go hard or anything. I wanted to ride the waves. And that same buddy, his stepfather was the chief dolphin trainer at SeaWorld. So on the weekends throughout the winter, we would go on a Sunday morning and I would actually feed, you know, clean the seals' pens and feed them. And then we'd go over to the dolphins and feed the dolphins. And then we'd actually go and train with the dolphins. So we'd swim around, get towed around, hop on their backs and do all the tricks and all that sort of stuff. And this is when I was like 13, 14, you know, so the ocean and the water and the marine creatures have always tapped me back into a deeper sense of who I am. And just recently foiling, it's all of a sudden like I've taken another step where instead of riding the surface of the wave, I've learned how to ride the subtle movements that are underneath it. And it totally relates to where I'm in life, because instead of worrying about how I look or what the money is or what the job is or, you know, the house or the car or, you know, I've sort of ceased largely in worrying about any of that stuff. And I've moved more into, as self-titled a soul coach, move more into how to ride those subtle flows that are underneath the surface of life, you know. So it's a funny thing that the ocean's just connected me back to that constantly. I always said since I was a kid that I felt like I was having a spiritual bath, and I never had a religious upbringing or any connotation attached to it. That was the words that I chose. It was like a spiritual bath whenever I went in the water, and I always came out a better person than I went in, and probably more succinctly, I came out more connected to who I really am than I was when I go in sort of frustrated, worried, fearful, you know, all those sort of things. So, mate, I love it. I just been out foiling this morning, and one of my buddies is Carl Muggeridge, and Carl is actually ex-Supersport, you know, world champion, superbike rider, amazing guy, you know, learned to meditate and control his emotions in his mind, and then went to a whole other level. And he's found foiling as well. And the two of us, just, you know, two ex-athletes in different fields, we both every morning, you know, we're like, where are we foiling today, you know? And we're just sharing about this new lease on life that it's given us. So the other thing that the ocean's always given me is new friends and new ways to relate, new ways to connect, and new ways to experience the whole planet. And I travel the world and I get to do crazy things. This Saturday I fly to Lord Howe Island. I've got an ocean swim week for 7 days out there, 5 days of taking people swimming in the world's southernmost coral reef and World Heritage listed beautiful place. And, you know, my main job is actually helping people shift their consciousness, but my main passion is following the ocean wherever it goes.
Trevor, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the earlier part of your story, and, you know, thinking about a lot of young men. And I shared my story of sitting on the couch eating Nutrigrain, which is probably as close as I came to the World Ironman Championships, that's for sure. But, you know, a lot of our listeners, you know, they're aspiring, they're athletic, you know, they put themselves under huge pressures, you know, particularly in that developmental time. There's lots of sacrifices that you make, you know, becoming a professional athlete. And I imagine for yourself, there were probably a few things that, you know, in the early part of your story, at least, that you sort of had to sacrifice on the altar to kind of get to the level that you got to.
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest things, which was a healthy thing to sacrifice, but it came back and sort of sprung back at me a little bit, was that through the age of 16, 17, 18, I had very, very strong goals after never winning a race in my life, never winning anything. At 16 years of age, I set some really lofty goals, and they were to be the world champion, the Australian champion, to win it more times than anyone else. I had no reason for setting those goals because I was the 5th best junior Ironman in my club, 300 clubs. You know, I had no reason to think that I could do that. But my hero was Dwayne Tyers, who was the world champion, and he always treated me really well. And he, at a time where I felt a bit bullied and belittled in the dog-eat-dog, you know, part of growing up in the surf club, and the guy was a year older. He was the Australian champion, and he got the girls all the time, and he had the abs, and he could surf, and he got the laughs, and he seemed to call the shots. And you know, that dog eat dog boys life of growing up was I felt like a nobody and a nothing. And I saw Dwayne, and he would send me postcards from Europe in the off season when I'm like 16, 15, and I'm like, this guy who was the world champion in you know, the best part of our sport, the hardest part of our sport, and he gives me the time of day. You know, he thinks about me. It's like, wow, you know. And Dwayne saw something in me. He didn't do that with anyone else for some reason, and he saw something in me, and he just looked after me, you know. And that sense of care to me made just a massive difference to me. And so I set these goals that to no longer be bullied and pushed around, I needed to be like him. So I needed to be the world champion. And to do it properly, I needed to actually win more than him and more than anybody else ever, so they could never question my manhood again, you know. Wow. Manhood again. And these were all subconscious. I didn't realize I was making these decisions. They were subconscious decisions, but they came out with a mighty whack later. I realized them, and I clearly saw them, and I remembered the little moments, the dark moments when I was walking through Surfers Paradise, having just realized that my girlfriend was now sitting on the lap of the guy that was the Australian champion, and I'm reeling, heartbroken, going, clearly I have to be better than him, or as good as him, or better than him to get the girl and keep the girl. And this is all very subconscious stuff, you know. Right. And
when did it come out for you, Trev? Like, was it just sort of something that happened as post your career, or, you know, in your active career as an Ironman, or
No, definitely. What basically happened was that it became a big driver for me. So I went on to win all those things and win all the titles and be better than anybody ever and all that sort of stuff. I'm like, why do I feel? Why was my body collapsing? Why is my relationship collapsed? Why is my finances not going so great? Like I'm a master in the water to a degree, but I'm a fish out of water when it comes to all these other things and these other interactions. And the biggest key thing was the gateway was vulnerability, because I tried to create a persona that was impenetrable, that the girl will never leave me, and that, you know, that I'll never be second choice again, and all this sort of stuff. So I unconsciously created this Ironman persona to solve all these problems that were deeper, emotional 14, 15, 16-year-old boy problems. Yeah. You know, that I couldn't talk to my dad about it, not because my dad wasn't an amazing man, he was, but I didn't have that sort of talk about everything relationship. I didn't have that inside of myself anyway. Even if he was available for, I wasn't aware of it, and I was too self-conscious to talk to anybody about it. I didn't have those other uber aware, super aware people, men that were around that were guiding me to talk about it. Most men were guiding me to be successful, not guiding me to actually be open and vulnerable. So they were all my role models, and that's all great. I followed that path, and basically years later, when this was all collapsing, I bumped into these other great teachers, and one of them said to me, "How are you going?" I was like, yeah, good. He's like, no, come on, how are you really going? I was like, yeah, good. No, how are you really going inside of yourself? And how's your relationship going? Oh, you know, crap. And how's this going? Oh, not so good. And how's that going? Not so good. So how are you going? Oh, yeah, well, I'm not that good, really, am I? Right. Like, I look like a winner. I've got all the trophies. I've broken all the records. I'm making $1 million. You know, I'm on all the shows and all that sort of stuff, and looked like I was living the dream. But inside, I was kind of, you know, morally, spiritually bankrupt. And so what came out of that was, you know, going back to what you originally said, was I sacrificed growing up, and I wasn't out with all the other guys chasing girls. I wasn't out drinking. You know, I was never a drugs person. I never went down that path. But I wasn't doing the drinking and all that sort of stuff. I became the champ. And then when I became the champ, then I started going out after the races and celebrating, and then chasing the girls in the wrong way and all this stuff, you know, that was out of ethics for me, for who I really was. So, you know, I sacrificed things that were healthy to sacrifice, because they, you know, they're not great, healthy things. But then it came back with a vengeance later, because I still had that ego connection, and it kind of sprung back to me. And then all of a sudden I was drinking after races, you know, and I was doing things that I wake up next day and go, oh, that's not me, you know. Well, actually, I wouldn't even wake up and think that. I go, yeah. And it was a few years until I bumped into these people that said, hey, mate, the stuff that you didn't resolve when you were 14, 15 or 16, it's biting you in the ass now. You can win all that stuff, but you're still not actually at peace with yourself. And it made so much sense, Ray. And what happened was the moment this man said this to me, I instantly drove down. I was mad at him. I was really mad at him. He told me I had some anger issues. and I stood there with a smile on my face. He was a chiropractic kinesiologist. And I stood there with a smile on my face. And he said, anger issues, and you got some intolerant, some allergies. I think you might be dairy intolerant. I stood there thinking, who the hell does this guy think he is? And he's just told me I've got anger issues. And the first thing I did was got really internally angry.
Yeah.
And then I remember thinking, just mental note to yourself that you do appear to be angry about what he just said, And I was living oblivious to these internal reactions that I was having. And also I drove away thinking, dairy intolerant, ice cream and chocolate's the only thing that's keeping me alive, So I drove down the road and I literally had this moment where my shoulder wasn't aching and my hip wasn't aching, and I felt like more balanced, and I was like, had all this energy inside of me, and I'm like, but he didn't even do anything to me. And this voice in my head said, he told you the truth.
Wow.
And I went, oh my God. So that was the first time I was exposed to what's the truth. And know ye the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Like, it was the first time I came across that, oh my God, the truth came in, and I immediately felt all this freedom even in my body, and he hadn't touched it. And I went back to him. I was originally going to go back to him to prove him wrong, because he said, you won't win another world title unless you handle this. And I was 3 times world champion, and I went back to prove him wrong. And but actually along the way I was like, hang on a second, he's onto something. And he's been my best friend for many years, and I just did a seminar on the weekend that he came and attended and said, oh, I need a bit of help. Came along and opened up to a few more viewpoints. And so we're, he's 62 and I'm 51, and we're still traveling together, but that opened me up to a whole bunch of stuff. So I sacrificed stuff that I later came back and bit me in the butt, because deeper down I wasn't actually satisfied inside of myself.
So it's a lot to unpack there. And, one of the things as you're speaking, I was thinking about is, with the various people that you talked about, whether it was Dwayne earlier or the guy you meet later in your life, is one of the things we're seeing in the research that's coming through really strongly particularly for young men, is the importance of being connected. And I've, for a long time, thought about that as being connected in, I guess, a motivational sense, that I'm part of the community. Yes. But, hearing you talk, it's just really hitting me. Wow, the connections about these people who are prepared to have honest conversations with you, and the fact that, you're actually maybe not initially receptive, but overall receptive to hearing that, speaks to, I guess, success in that, through that connection, you've become more aware, and that's become a mechanism for change for you.
For sure. I think connected is such a powerful word and world as well, word and world, the connected world, it's been the key difference to me. The gateway into it is vulnerability. The gateway into it is truth and transparency and vulnerability. And vulnerability, people think, I often do seminars and workshops and I say, finish this sentence, and I put vulnerability is up on the board and I write ...
Yeah.
And out of it comes vulnerability is dangerous. Vulnerability is weak. Vulnerability is, an opportunity occasionally comes up. Then mostly the negatives. Vulnerability is weak. The one that I had when I first was asked the question is, vulnerability is to be avoided at all costs.
Yeah.
So literally, if you break that down, I was avoiding vulnerability no matter what cost. Because vulnerability is going to get you, and vulnerability will get you killed. Vulnerability will expose you. Vulnerability will be used against you. Vulnerability will be your undoing. These are the standard things that come out of the mouths of men and women, particularly men. But vulnerability is actually just transparency. It's truth in a moment. When someone says, how are you going? And you say, not that great. That's vulnerability. Vulnerability is not falling on the ground crying, opening ourselves up to weeks and weeks and months of, I'm leading with my heart and my emotions, everything. Vulnerability is just the truth.
Yeah.
It's just what's the actual truth. And the other thing someone said to me, vulnerability is, they talk about the cricket. He's vulnerable to the short ball. And so now if you listen to it, they don't say vulnerable to shock, or they say susceptible.
Susceptible, yeah.
And susceptibility and vulnerability are different things.
Yeah.
Fallibility is a different thing to vulnerability as well. Vulnerability means opening ourselves up to what's actually happening. And the crazy thing is, the great Brené Brown work is vulnerability. You can't selectively numb. So if you're not vulnerable to the grief that I have, or the sense of loss that I've just gone through from losing my position in my job, or whatever it may be, if you're not vulnerable to that, then you're also not vulnerable to your power and your truth and your connection to other people. So, connection is a really, really powerful thing, but the quickest way to get there is to find common ground. The saying that we travel a lot further over common ground, but simply let's start a conversation about one thing and see how we all relate to it.
Yeah.
And as soon as you do that, it creates an opening and a connection and vulnerability. And then now we're really traveling. We're heading towards togetherness and oneness, which is the great truth of life, that we are all one. We share the same life force. And, and we're heading away from the great illusion, which is we are all separate and there's a limited amount of resources that we're all in competition for. Well, that might seem like that in the physical sense, but spiritually that's not the case. So, everything's available to us in any moment, including the answers, which we already have inside of us. We're just bouncing off of each other to find them. So vulnerability also leads to power, connection, and greater collaboration. And then the whole world's, now your oyster.
Wow, I need to unpack that. That's great. There's a lot to think about. In terms of that connectedness and the authenticity, I think that you're talking about, I was thinking of a story. I did a rites of passage program a few years ago, and one of the guys.
Is that with Anna Rubinstein?
Anna, yeah, and the guy.
I love Anna. Yes.
He looked at me and said, mate, we're much more similar than. He was sort of, winding me up a bit, and he said, we're much more similar than we are different, because we've been, crossing over on a few things. I said, what do you mean? He goes, we're both 70% water. And I thought, even that as a starting point.
Absolutely,
it was really great. And when you actually think about it, there are so many similarities that we share. And gee, isn't it interesting how we choose to, as discriminating points or discriminating factors, we choose to focus on what makes us different and unique. And sometimes that's great, because that's our genius and that's a wonderful thing, and we love the differences in people. But it's really healthy to remember, how much we do share, and as you say, that vulnerability space, connecting into that as a starting point.
And I think the water thing is an element that resonates and connects us. So we hold the vibration. So there's that great Dr. Emoto work where the vibration of water, that he would put certain labels on the jar and he would freeze the water. And then
photos.
Yeah, and exactly as it was freezing, there'd be crystals, and he'd look through and he'd find the crystal that was most representative of the way the water was freezing. And based on the label that was placed on the jar, or the music that was being played in the background, etc., the crystals would look very much so. If you had heavy metal, the crystals would look all distorted. If you played, Mozart, the crystals would look all beautiful. So there's this vibratory thing that travels through everything. And I love the Nikola Tesla quote, if you want to understand the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. So if we get out of the mind and the body and we start thinking that everything is energy, there's energy behind everything, that you start actually seeing, well, the frequency of the vibration of energy is what dictates what gravitates to what, where it sits, how the interaction feels, all those sort of things. So the music creates a frequency that goes through the jar, and then the water actually, as it freezes, creates these ice crystals that actually vibrates to the rate of the music. Now, if you think that water, if we're 70% fluid inside of us, and there's a thing that Keith Maitland, the man that I was talking about before, he opened me up to a concept that they're discovering this thing called the interstitium, and it precedes the lymphatic system. So it's in our organs, but if we take it out to the skin level, right between the skin and the lymphatics is this layer called the interstitium, and they didn't know it until certain things would show up in science, and I won't go into it because I can't explain it, but basically what they've discovered is these little tubules, these tiny little tubules that actually hold fluid in them, And that fluid, they believe, is actually what holds the resonance of our vibration and our frequency. And some of them say that's what that holds the soul in the body, right? Which is a really interesting viewpoint. But this interstitium, the crazy thing is, when they take it, they can locate it, but when they take it outside of the body, it collapses on itself and disappears.
Mm-hmm.
So it only basically exists at this finest vibratory level between the physical and the non-physical, and it holds fluid in it, which holds communication information. This is what they believe. So these are all viewpoints. I often say to people, don't believe anything I say, just check it out for yourself. But
well, it's great to connect people to ideas, isn't it? And this is what's exciting about these conversations, is that, and hearing you speak and talking about, the ocean almost being like an equalizer and a source of, growth and strength and renewal and change, and then hearing you talk about, these new ideas coming out around how the body, also stores, a similar thing and a similar pattern. I think that they're absolutely things that that our listeners would be really interested in learning more about, and we always, as educators, we always, and I think as you're suggesting, you approach these things with a mind that's open, but also one that's informed, and that looks at, where are some of the connections, where might things go. I mean, all ideas seem radical when they first appear. Yeah. If you look at the history of science, people used to think the heart was a furnace, and then they invented a pump, and then they realized, that's what the heart does. So sometimes, the radical idea comes first, and sometimes it remains radical and it turns out to be something different. Dwayne, I just wanted to spend a moment on that, because I know some of the boys that might tune into this would be really interested, I think, to hear. And, you're talking about, great young man and, budding AFL footballer who I know in Nathan Murphy, and, developing into the person he's becoming, and, with Dwayne, you look up to him in terms of being a role model. When you were occupying that space yourself, just going back a little bit in time, were you aware of the impact that you could potentially have with others just by being who you were and competing at the level that you were? Did you have a sense of that?
I definitely had a sense of it, and it was definitely part of my bigger picture, and even part of my conscious process at the time was to try and be good for other people.
Yeah.
So I think that came probably from my dad, but also appreciating that I had coaches and people around me that were helping, and when you in sport, you often, if you're good at your sport, you often start to be touted or aspire towards being the captain.
Yeah.
And the captain of the team. And, I wanted to make the Australian team, and I made the Australian team. Then I became the captain of the Australian team. And it was like, once I did, by the way, I didn't know what to do. I didn't have a clue what to do. But deep inside, I always wanted to make a difference. And that was probably the part of me that was true to me the whole way through, while I was being the Ironman and impenetrable, which is kind of that shadow or that ego, that unconscious part I was carrying with me. Filtered through that was, I love people, I love making a difference, I love lightening the mood, I love the flow of the ocean. And so I always tried to help, the younger guys. And so one of them, Dwayne was the world champion before me. The world championships every 2 years, and I won it 4 years after him. And then I was, helping out Nathan Meyer, who won the next two world championships in 96, 98. I coached Phil Clayton, who won it in 2000. I coached Shannon Eckstein, who won it in 2002.
Yeah.
He then lost it in 4 and 6, and I moved on to other areas. And then he came back, and Shannon won in 8, 10, 12, 14 and 16.
Wow.
And then I've also coached and supported, or coached the coach that coaches Ali Day, who's the 6 times Coolangatta Gold champion, couple of Nutrigrain Series titles, the best Ironman in the world right now, and he won the World Championship last year as well. So we've had this crazy lineage or passing on of all these world titles that have come through this teaching. It's almost like like a dojo, or the one indigenous region that produces great footballers is this. Between Southport, Surfers Paradise and Northcliffe, the 3 beaches in a row.
Yeah.
The world title before Dwayne was won by Southport. The 2 world titles that before Shannon started winning the game was Northcliffe, and then Shannon was in Northcliffe. So between 3 beaches, an essential thing, we've won every World Ironman Championship since 1981.
It's amazing, isn't it?
So I've always had this sense of, it's crazy. It's in the water. I've always had this sense of passing on. But having said that, I was definitely not aware of the degree to which I could make a difference. So that's been an exploration the whole way. And what I've also done is I found that I do better work now helping the Nathan Murphys of the world and my son TJ and Ali Day and, you know, a lot of people that I work with. I do better work now helping them help the kids. I help the kids and I love it and it's really, really cool. But when I help the young guys help the young guys, it actually feels even better because it's not about repeating something over and over and over again myself. I've done that. It's actually about helping someone else do it and pass it on. And, you know, so I've started off being the athlete, then I was the coach, then I was the coach of the coach, and now I'm the coach of the coach of the coach, you know. And it's like just moving on and evolving and allowing other people to step in and take their power. Yeah.
You know, just talking about TJ, you know, he's going great guns in his career as a surf lifesaver. What are you learning as a parent of an athlete's son, and how are you finding and navigating him through some of the challenges about high performance and managing, you know, ego and vulnerability and all of those things? What advice would you give to parents?
Well, firstly, I've got 4 kids, and my 31-year-old daughter, Christelle, is amazing, connected, you know, businesswoman, leader, inspirer, communicator. So learning so much from knowing how to support her as she goes into, you know, starting a family and all that sort of stuff. Then I've got TJ go past TJ. So I've got Bailey, who's 21, who's 6'4", and he's an actor. He was just on Dora the Explorer and he was in a little being an Aquaman. But he's also worked out that he loves healing and he loves helping people. He's got amazing hands and he's just this big kid who's more like the black sheep that runs around everywhere. Is Bailey home? You haven't seen him for 3 days, you know, and he's just the most beautiful soul who's teaching me so much. And then Charlie, the 16 going on 17-year-old who's in year 12, she's her own free spirit. So they're all teaching me different things. But if I come back to TJ, you know, he's the one that's followed in the footsteps around sport and everything else. And he's so unique. And the one thing I've learned is that, you know, I've been world Ironman champion and broken all these records and, you know so much and I'm so connected to the ocean and everything. And when he asked me, Dad, which way should I go today in the ocean? Every time I'd tell him it wouldn't work out.
Right.
But as soon as I worked that out and went, which way do you think you should go? And he'd say, I'm thinking about there, but I'm thinking I'll go over there. And I'm like, yeah, I can see this and I can see that. You know, which one do you reckon? And he'd go, yeah, I'm going this way. And he'd do it and it would work out.
Right.
And I'm like, oh my God, it's got nothing to do with me. It's like I'm playing a role of actually setting him free. I'm not his parent as such, as in I've got to parent and govern him. It's more like, who's the man that you want to be? You know, it's that whole give a man a fish or teach a man to fish, you know, like I can keep showing him things or I can say, you make your decision, I'm going to back you 100%. You can always bounce it off me. And they're the biggest key things I've learned lately is that, you know, the one time I wasn't there recently for a Nutri-Grain race, the whole family wasn't there and he was down in Queenscliff. It was the first round of the series the year before last. And, you know, this is a massive thing for him. He's the, you know, son of a gun, so to speak, all that garbage. And it's like, how do I get out of Dad's shadow? And we laugh about it because I don't even think of myself that way. We just laugh. You know, can barely even remember it these days. But, you know, next minute, we're not there. And I turned to Jo and I said, I think TJ is going to win today. And she goes, I got the same feeling. And so we watched it online and TJ wins his first Nutri-Grain series race and was the first young guy to break the stranglehold of 7 or 8 champions for about 8 or 9 years, you know. And he just straight away broke this whole thing. It was like, so I'm not there for this round this weekend. And I said to him, TJ, couldn't get my flights quite organised to leave afterwards. I got to go look after these people on this swim week. And he goes, well, don't worry about me, Dad. Last time you weren't there, I won. You know, so go. You know, and that's what I'm learning is I'm still learning to let go because when I've been through 2 major relationships, my first and second marriage, and in between the two, at the end of my first marriage was when TJ was born, and when I was in the deep depths of not knowing who I was, and when he stared his big brown eyes back into mine when I picked him up when he was born, what reflected back to me was that I wasn't the man that I wanted to be. And I from that moment on, I began to shift myself to become the father I wanted to be, you know, for this son that was just born. And crazy thing is that years later, we raced in the Australian Board Rescue Championship together. And actually and through a crazy set of circumstances, scraped through every round, got in the final and won the final against, the best in the country and everything when I was like 47 and he was 21 or something like that, 2020. So we've had this amazing journey together, but that one child, every child's taught me something, but the one thing TJ's done is helped me to complete my own competitive ego cycle and come back to say, hey mate, I love you no matter what you do, and and if that's the journey you want to do, I'll support you 100%. So I have loved having one of the kids do it because it's been so cool to be able to relate to him so well and everything that he goes through and say, I understand, because it's a very lonely thing. But ultimately, it's just been the most incredible thing to have 4 kids that are all completely different.
Yeah. Yeah. You were just sharing, about the big brown eyes looking back and that realization about the dad that you wanted to be. And I suppose, unpack, again, it's also the man that you want to really be in wholeness and in fullness. And
who I really am. Yep.
I am with your vulnerability and, managing that sort of sense of being in the world and agency with, being someone who's part of a community. What do you think it is to be a good man these days?
Oh, wow. And I see so many men right now actually really undertaking this challenge, really asking themselves this question. I think things often get worse before they get better. And there's been so many mental health issues for men. And we've tried this path of being invulnerable and, impenetrable and bulletproof. And it's actually a lie. We all care so deeply. We all love so deeply. Our kids come up and give us a kiss and we melt. And, and when you first have a child and you hold them in your arms, your manhood just drops away fully and you don't know, oh my God, how do I look after this and everything I do? And unfortunately what happens is it hits you in the heart, but then we jump further back into our manhood to try and actually become the provider. And so there's that old saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, that we so want to deeply care for our wife and our kids that, or whoever it may be that's close to us, that we go down this path of actually doubling down on the becoming the provider or having the answers or being the one that knows the way through or whatever it is. And so I think I'm discovering for myself and a lot of people that I'm working with that being a man is ultimately being able to be honest, is ultimately being able to, in a moment, be connected with what I'm really feeling and what's really going on, and being able to slow down and occupy this moment, not cover it up with stories of the past or aims for the future, but to actually come back and actually be here in this moment and able to relate. And that's a really, really scary thing for men because, we fill the space with stories or ideas or challenges or games or whatever we do because we're just petrified of stopping and being still in this moment. And it's not because deep down we're petrified of it, but the fear inside of us, this idea that if I stop and I'll be vulnerable, if I'm vulnerable, you'll see my weaknesses. If you see my weaknesses, you won't love me, or you'll know that deep down I don't think I'm good enough, or that I am still guilty or shamed about something I did once that I've never told anybody. And, and the guilt and shame are massive, massive in the underlying subconscious landscape of men, that, and even if it's nothing we actually need to be guilty and shamed about, somehow we might have carried a connotation about sin or something from the past that we've never fully released. And we carry all these burdens with us, and so we try to be better all the time, better. And the truth is, let's just stop and share. And if you're brave enough to share, your mate will go, I don't ever realize you're thinking that. And to be honest, I've got the same thoughts, and that's, we travel a lot further over common ground. So I believe to be a man is to show up, to be honest, to be in this moment, and to be open, to be vulnerable and actually explore life beyond. I often talk about like a speedboat flying across a lake. You can drive around a speedboat and you can go around the whole lake at full speed, and someone says, you've been to that lake? And you go, yeah, I know it back to front. I've been around that whole lake, but did you ever actually stop? And when you slow down in the speedboat, you pull the accelerator, the accelerator handle back. The boat slows down. As it slows down, it stops skimming, and then there's a moment where it sinks a little bit deeper, where its true weight sinks into the water, and then that's the first step. slow down and ultimately stop and sink into the water and be still and watch everything float up around you and notice that different creatures come to the surface when you're still. But also, are you brave enough to then throw on your mask, throw the ankle down, hop over the side and swim down in the depths and have a little bit of a look? Because to me, that's where I've found such depth, such connection, such clarity. But crazily enough, I now know a lot more of what my future holds because I know exactly what it is I want to do. And so I've ticked both boxes. So I've become more aware of my role as a man and what I need to do, but I've become more able to just be with the people around me. And I love that. It's kind of a funny word that I use, but I adore living in life with openness because I just get to actually enjoy the moment and trust that everything happens as happens.
Yeah. I think some guys are okay with slow it down, the motor, and, you know, if you run out of petrol, that's okay and you can drift. But the bit, put the mask on and you know, dive down and be confronted with a few things that are under the surface, that can be pretty, you know, you might need a Keith or someone, you know, in your life who can kind of be that guy who walks alongside you, you know, in that new connected way. As you start.
I love the old saying, Ray. I love that saying. Not the saying, but you know, years ago when we had black and white TV, they used to have this thing. We interrupt your regular programming for this important broadcast. Yeah, you know, and important message. And I'm just like, that's the way I think these days, because our programming, our regular programming, is just to grow up exactly this way. So any man that's listening to this, well, welcome to planet Earth. This is what we do. This is actually we're fulfilling our programming. But do we want to live in our programming, or do we want to start being the programmer? You know, that we actually start redesigning and exploring who we can be more fully. And, you know, it took a Keith Maitland for me to interrupt my regular programming and actually for an important message. And it was, you know, you've got anger issues and you look like you might be dairy intolerant. Now I wanted to kill him in that moment. You know, instead I was like,
I'll smother him with chocolate ice cream.
You know, absolutely. And so that thing that I was coding over came out in that moment. I was so mad at him for telling me that. But 10 minutes later, when that little pain body episode calmed down, I was like, oh my God, he just told me the truth. And I felt better now than I have for 8 years. So I need to explore that. And that started something that's just been a symphony or a cacophony of things that have happened ever since that moment of exploring it.
Yeah, and those waves just keep rolling through. It's awesome. You know, just as you were talking about the programming, I was reading something that you wrote probably maybe a bit over a year now, and you're talking about the saying that the mind is a wonderful servant but a terrible master. How do you you talked about showing up and being vulnerable. I mean, is there anything else for parents or boys listening in finding a simple way, a routine that you could suggest about kind of unhooking from, you know, the tasks that the mind sets for us and the standards that aren't really there. They're not really who we are, and they're disconnected from who we actually are trying to become.
There's hundreds of them, and I'll give one briefly in a second. But the first thing is the curiosity. You know, I've been talking about the mind. There's an Einstein quote: "You cannot solve a problem on the same level of mind that it was created." Mm-hmm. You know, so if there's a problem and something is not ideal in your life, then look no further than your current thinking. What is the thinking that has led to that? I might have been avoiding having a conversation, or I might have been believing deep down that it'll never work out, or, you know, I've not followed through on a passion, or, you know, avoided those little, you know, morning routines of going for a walk and having a swim to wash off the energy, or whatever it might be. Is that first thing is to be curious about the fact that there is a programming going on, and there is a status quo, that as long as you don't go outside of that and you operate inside of that, you won't get too many hassles. You'll never fully be free, and you'll never fully be at the bottom of the barrel. But as long as you don't go outside of that status quo and just, you know, get a good job and follow a few things, you know, you'll probably end up depressed and go through some relationship breakup or whatever, or a sickness or an illness, because eventually something's got to give, because your spirit wants to wake up. But there's a general programming. So the curiosity about that is a really good place to start, because whatever we do, it has to be to get to know that, wow, I've got to get it out of my mind and back into my feelings, out of my mind and back into the feelings. So that might be out of my mind and back into the moment where I can feel my feelings. So for me, I go swimming, or, as I said, I go foiling, or I ride a stand-up, or a lot of things in the water, but I do qigong, or I do some meditation, which is really simple for me, or I do yoga, or I talk to a mate, or I help someone else, or I follow a passion, or I complete a cycle. All these things get me out of the mind and back in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
But the one simplest one I heard from Deepak Chopra many years ago, it's called stop. And it's a really powerful, simple one, and it reminds us of the power of our breath. So of all the physical things we're connected to, the breath is the most etheric one. So it's the path or the gateway between the physical and the spiritual or the metaphysical, the whatever's beyond that. Leave it up to other people to work out what they believe in. But stop, and stop stands for stop, So whenever you're in a situation where you just don't feel present, just stop. Or there's a problem, stop. Don't answer back. Just say, hey, look, give me 5 minutes, put the phone down, walk away from the email, just say to the kids, all right, I'll talk to you again soon, because they come back and they've just had some behaviour like, what I'm about to say is going to be complete replication of what my father said that I promised I'd never say, So, and I'm not going to realise it until after I say it in anger, So put the phone down, put whatever it is, stop and walk away, So the T stands for take 3 breaths.
Right.
So the thing with taking 3 breaths, it'll make a difference straight away. But if you can do this one thing, close your eyes, and as you breathe out straight away, because you can't take a breath in until you've breathed out. So breathe out to start.
Mm-hmm.
As you breathe in, close your eyes and purse your lips and feel the temperature coming through your lips, going into the back of your throat, and follow it all the way down. Make sure it goes all the way down into your diaphragm. It's called conscious breathing. So when you consciously breathe, then you follow it all the way down into your diaphragm. You activate your parasympathetic nervous system with only a few breaths, which takes you out of the firing of the amygdala in the upper central brain, which gets you out of right and wrong, good and bad, past and future, rich and poor, fat and skinny, hot and cold, win or lose, success or failure. It gets you out of the duality of life, which is just a judgmental state. So as soon as you breathe into your diaphragm, you signify to your body that you're actually no longer being chased by a saber-toothed tiger. So your old DNA recognizes that there's no immediate danger. So follow it consciously down all the way into your diaphragm, fill up the belly, fat belly, and then up into the chest, full chest, and then push it up into the head region as well. That's the 3 different registers of the breath. Hold it, and then breathe out. When you breathe out, follow the temperature back out. Feel the different temperature as it goes out. Do that 3 times. Follow it back in. Maybe the second one you could follow it through the nose, which is an even more conscious breath, all the way down. What actually happens is multiple things. One is your physiology changes. You activate your DNA to say, in your DNA recognizes, and your subconscious mind recognizes you're no longer in danger. And so you go out of the fight or flight response. So you don't fight it or run away from it, and you come into the prefrontal cortex and you begin to actually operate in present time. But the other thing too is that as you're following the breath consciously, you're taking your mind away from whatever the problem was. So you cannot solve a problem on the same level of mind it was created. So rather than just activate that mind and bounce back in and fight it like we have 20 more times, and same pattern that happens with our relationship partner, our sister, our mother, our brother, our kids, just patterns on repeat, just pause and break the pattern, break the cycle. If you do 5 of them or 10 of them, my goodness, you'll go into a whole other state and you might have to lay down because you'll get dizzy. But at minimum, take 3. So the T is take 3 breaths, but take 3 conscious breaths. O stands for open back up to the situation, and P stands for proceed.
Right.
So now that is the simplest thing. But even me, my mind will tell me, that won't work, because your mind does not want you to do it.
Yeah.
What's that garbage? Some resistance to doing 3 breaths. But if you do it, your mind will try and talk you out of it. But if you do it every single time, you'll get a shift in state. And when you get a shift in state, you'll get a shift in behavior. When you get a shift in behavior, you get a shift in expression. an outward expression, and you'll get a shift in result.
It's great. It's a great piece of advice for anyone, really, isn't it? I can really see
simple, practical one, isn't it?
Yeah, and the S stop, yeah.
And I guarantee you won't want to do it. Guarantee you'll be like, oh, look at that, I don't want to do that.
I'll do it as soon as I've told this bloke exactly what I.
Yeah, I'll tell him, and then I'll do it. and that's the thing is. And just know that I know it comes in because the mind wants to stay alive. And I love Eckhart Tolle, and I heard him pause once in front of 1,000 people, and he said, "Oh, by the way, do you know that your ego wants you dead? Your mind, your ego, your connection to all the dramas of the world, the problems, the good, the bad, the up or down, that mind-made self wants you dead. It wants your spiritual part of you, your simple, heartfelt connection to this moment. It wants it completely neutered, inadequate, not talking. Zip it. The mind wants to be controlling everything. So the mind is a wonderful servant, but a terrible master. And I often say if you're in a bus, you should never let the mind be the driver of the bus. The mind can be the steering wheel, but that you need to be the driver. Whether it's your heart. Yeah, it's drive towards your true north. Where do you want to end up? Go towards that. Begin with the end in mind. Begin with the end in mind, not begin with your mind. So
the other way around. Yeah.
Yeah. Begin with your heart in mind.
With the with where we're headed, it's been an amazing conversation, and I think I'm probably going to need to listen to it again just to unpack. So much of what you've spoken about. The last question, the question that we ask everybody is, if you had a story that you could tell a 14-year-old boy and he'd listen, what would the story be?
I wrote a program when I was older, and it's called the Boot Camp for the Soul, because I recognise that life is one big boot camp for our soul. All other things are like a game of chess. You can move them, you can win and lose games. All sorts of other things are wonderful. They're amazing places to express yourself, but the bottom line is you're learning how to be yourself. So I thought about this question, and I thought, my 14-year-old self, what it would need to hear, or any 14-year-old boy, I'd say the same thing, and that is be true to yourself. I know that I was so scared of my vulnerability and my sensitivity because I picked up on so much of what was going on. So I traded that off to become the Ironman. But I only ever won the Ironman from the intuition or the vulnerability and sensitivity when I allowed that to come through and stopped trying to win the race. And I used to run around the cans and I run around the flags, and I used to have this song stuck in my head. You got to go your own way, and I always went my own way. And when I did, I won, and so that was wonderful because I learned to use my intuition to win those races. But I also covered up along the way who I really, really was. It was trying to shine through in those races, but ultimately I had to come back. And it was this crazy thing was I turned myself into something else so I could be safe enough to be myself. And the insanity of that was I then had to actually stop being that other thing to be the person I always was. So what I would say to a 14-year-old boy is you have everything you need inside of you. You are magical. You may be a warrior that wants to go out and fight the good fight. You may be a guardian that loves to care for other people and just shares your lunch and just always cares for others. You may be a jester who wants to always lighten the mood, in the deeper archetypes of life. Or you may be a mastermind who loves to solve problems. Yeah. But deep down, what you have inside of you is exactly what the world needs. So do not turn yourself into somebody else to try and satisfy the other people that ultimately need you to be who you are, even if they fight with you when you do it. But the reason they fight with you when you become your full self is because they're scared to be themselves as well. So do it not just for yourself, but on behalf of them. And when they try and stop you from doing it, just keep going and gather the people around you, your tribe around you, that actually looks after you and makes that sustainable. And as you know, I'm co-founder of the Life Changer Foundation, and we do work around, the country with kids, boys and girls between 10 and 15 years of age. And what we say to all of them is there's a hero inside of you, and you're on a hero's journey, and everything you need you have inside you. You have all your own answers find your way, but find your tribe that helps you to supports you to find the best in yourself, because young man, you are magical, and that's what I'd say. And by the way, I'm lucky enough that I regularly get to say that. And every time I do, I feel like I free up a little bit of myself as well, because I'm still coming through the vulnerabilities of what it felt like to shut that down and to be not true to myself for so long, and how damaging that is to me, to my own psyche, to my own soul, to pretend to be something else. And don't do it. If you do that, if you have to do it, wake up from it as soon as you can.
Yeah, it's got a shelf life, doesn't it?
Totally.
I'm totally with you, Trevor. As a teacher, it's just such a daily joy to see that and to say that and to acknowledge so many young people with the direction of who they're becoming. It is a real joy. I think we're so lucky in this in our country, to be where we are, for so many of us at least. And Trevor,
Absolutely.
as you're saying, the go your own way. I love that around the flags, and you were talking about that earlier. With your son, with TJ, and his decision making. And I think really, as you've gone your own way, you've liberated so many of us through your message, through your story, and hopefully through this conversation today. So Trevor Hendy, thank you so much for being on the Understanding Boys podcast with us today. And, we wish you all the very best for the work you do with young people, with, in the corporate sphere, in your coaching, and hopefully we'll get to see you out there in the waves one day.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Always a pleasure to be with you, mate, and keep up the good work.
Well, we hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Understanding Boys podcast. Make sure you subscribe on your podcast app, and please leave us a review to help grow the community. For more information about the podcast, visit understandingboys.com.au. Until next time, thanks for listening.